Are you looking for an inspiring listen? Something to motivate you? You've come to the right place. Welcome to Women of the Northwest, where we have conversations with ordinary women leading extraordinary lives. Motivating, inspiring, compelling.
But also this sense of how do we start to rebuild a relationship that's with our mortality, with death and dying, that isn't based in fear, isn't overwhelmed with taboos and stigma, that becomes normalized.
Welcome, everyone, to Women of the Northwest. So happy that you are listening today because we've got a treat. I have Margot Lalich with me. Welcome, Margo.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
We are going to go through probably, a dozen topics because we got one extraordinary woman here.
And I have a passion project that's just been germinating for a long time and then finally was synthesized about a year and a half ago when it launched. It was in development for about 2.5 years with two co-founders, and it's the North Coast EOL Collective. And EOL is end of life. And some of that was coming out of the pandemic and just realizing how ill-prepared we are as a society, as a community, to really support and understand and have a living relationship with our mortality. And so the vision of the North Coast EOL Collective is a collective approach to death and dying, because we've medicalized death and dying, over the decades, and really bringing it back to the community. So you can see there's that foundation of community, public health, right? But also this sense of how do we start to rebuild a relationship that's with our mortality, with death and dying, that isn't based in fear, isn't overwhelmed with taboos and stigma, that becomes normalized. And so there are many components to the collective. A big part of it is education, and I oversee the education component, which is available to anyone, anywhere. Most of it's web-based. And then we also, I facilitate, and I've been involved with death cafes for a very long time, but death cafes, which are opportunities for individuals in the community to come together and sit in a space and actually talk about death and dying, which seems like, why would you want to do that? You'd be surprised about how many people want to do that, who show up of all ages, who are bringing their stories, their anecdotal stories, their belief systems, their cultural identity, all into these conversations. And it's almost, you can just feel this exhale that happens in the room. And so that's been going on here locally for a year. It's been down once a month in Nehalem. One is starting in Seaside in November, and hopefully we'll move up the coast. It was also virtual for a while, and then we provide a number of other services. One of my co-founders has a career in hospice and palliative care, and she is a manager for a health system full-time, but she also has a private practice focused on grief and bereavement. And then our other co-founder is much more focused on legacy and the fine arts. So we have a fabulous website, I'll just say that, and people are welcome to visit that. So that's really a passion project. And we are not a nonprofit. We went through the rigorous process of becoming B Corp. Not because we are a business that's out to sell a product and make money, but it's really that commitment to changing the paradigm, that to have a social impact, to do good, you must be a nonprofit, and really returning to this idea of a collective approach, and that we can create something, and how do we as community assign value to it.
Right.
And it's been a fascinating kind of unfolding emergence. And I think it's just the conversations that it has ignited and how that is evolving. And when those moments when individuals will go, I never thought about it that way. Right. And I'm like, it's just so interesting. The thing that we spend our lives avoiding prematurely, which is our death, that we're most afraid of, because for many people, they don't have certainty about what happens after. We have this idea that anything related to that should be charitable. or should be nonprofit,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Or very, very, very expensive to the point where it debilitates people's lives
Exactly.
because it's related to how costly our healthcare system is, right?
Mhm.
To fortunately save our lives, right? But also for all that we do to navigate treatment and experimental treatments. And so, yet when we want to come together in community and create this collective approach and relationship with community to support one another, there's no value to that. It's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah.
It's absolutely
Yeah.
fascinating. So that takes me back to my kind of sociological
Right.
roots, honestly, as social systems. How is it that we've evolved this direction and what does that look like? And so we've been, we serve the North Coast, Tillamook, and Clatsop counties, but word's out. I mean, we get contacted by entities in the East Coast.
Mm.
We have a book forum that's happening right now with over 100 participants from around the country with a leader in sort of the end of life arena. And so that's been fascinating. So that's something I've been doing and
stimulating
stimulating
conversations and
yeah. And then, and many projects connected with that. I mean, I've been working with a small community in Tillamook that's very, very isolated who reached out to the collective, a small group of that community, and said, we're really impressed with the work that the collective is doing, and we'd like to meet with you and have a conversation. And this started a few months ago, and we've met and had a couple conversations, and they've said, we would really like to maybe formalize a project within our community. There's about 80 of us that live in this unincorporated community. Many of us are older, most of us. What would it look like if we formally adopted basically an initiative or project under their community association that's focused on aging in place and preparing for end of life? This is now a community approach, right? A collective approach.
Yeah.
And so we worked to kind of develop what that whole launch would be for this particular initiative that will be very much could be about capacity building, community driven. And we met Saturday and we launched this project and there were many aspects to it. And one was kind of a large group, if you will, SWOT analysis of just really looking at what are our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities, the threats that will support us or prevent us from aging in place and, navigating the end of life that we imagine for ourselves.
Yeah.
It was amazing. This community came together and said, we want to do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it just, all these things are percolating up and it's such an honor to be a part of it. And we're learning and exploring and creating together. And I just think, this is what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Here's your purpose right now. And I can see how all of the things that you learned over your years as county health, and administrating and all that work together. They all weave together. And come together
it's just kind of this synthesis of all of it.
Yeah. So describe a little bit, if a person wanted to join into a cafe, what would that look like? What happens there?
When they come. So this is what it looks like, for example, in Nehalem. And it's a collaboration with the North Coast Recreation District. They wanted to be a partner for us. And they treat us as if we're a nonprofit, even though formally we're not a nonprofit. And again, that was a very conscious and long decision process that we had about that. And so we are in their fireplace room. And a facilitator of a death cafe, it's a model with Fidelity. It came out of the UK quite some time ago. And I come and I set up the room. We sit in a circle. I usually bake something. We have tea.
Because what's a meeting without food?
I bring real cups, nice ceramic cups from a potter who's no longer alive, but used to live in Cannon Beach, and really just create kind of that space and ambiance that makes people feel welcome and comfortable. And then it's in-person death cafes are an hour and a half, and it's from 4 to 5:30. How do people know about it? Our collective has a listserv. And so at the beginning of each month, I send out an email just letting people know what's happening in terms of the education in death cafes specifically. We have a whole calendar of events where we post a lot of other things on that. And then I also use the BBQ to advertise on that, to let people know. And then people, I always ask to let me know if they're coming, because it's nice to have at least 5 people. Sometimes I get an email. Most of the time, people just show up.
Yeah.
There can be anywhere from 5 to 15 people. Some people know each other. Sometimes it's strangers. I've had people all the way from across the river come all the way to Nehalem wanting to be a part of the conversation. People maybe are navigating the end of life process for a loved one, a spouse, someone in their home. Somebody may be experiencing grief from bereavement, from loss. There have been participants who've recently had a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, and yet they're still very functional. And so they're really thinking about, advanced care planning, and we're all certified advanced care planners in the collective. Or I'll have someone who's been in pastoral care who has now become an end-of-life doula. I've had a woman in her 40s who was the least likely candidate to have a stroke and had a stroke and has been in rehabilitation and had children and is like, I never thought I'd be navigating and thinking about my mortality at this point in my life. So people come with all kinds of stories. Sometimes there's tears.
Yeah.
It's about holding space. I just facilitate the conversation. There's no agenda. And rarely does it ever need a prompt.
Yeah.
People come and they want to talk. They listen well, they speak well, and people also start to build connection. And out of it, some other things have launched in the community. And so it's just really holding that space. And people always feel better afterwards. Yeah. And, they just come when they know they need to come. And it's such an honor. And there's so much wisdom in that circle, right? There's so much wisdom in it.
Yeah. Feels good, doesn't it?
Yeah. There's no right or wrong. And, people have some people have their fears and they want to be able to talk about those fears, or they're navigating conflict within their family because some people want things one way or they think things should be one way, and others maybe deviate from what has been a familial or social norm in their community. And they just want to be able to talk about it without being judged. And death cafes are not therapy. They're not grief groups.
It's just a safe place.
It's just a safe place. And part of the fidelity of the model is that you cannot charge to host a death cafe. And there's also an international website. So anything that's virtual can be posted on that website as well. And sometimes people, if they're able, they contribute to the collective. And if not, we don't give it a second thought.
Right, right. What motivated you to go down this path, explore doing this? And
the End of Life Collective?
Yeah.
Well, like I said, it was really a synthesis of, I think, just everything. My personal experiences with loss and death and dying, my perspective on witnessing it individually and at a community level, naturally and also traumatically in so many different parts of the world. Certainly my practice clinically, I've been a, clinical nurse in the hospital as well as home health, but always a life embedded in public health. And then I think just most recently, the pandemic. And then also, I think for me, always pondering, why isn't we don't talk about certain things? Yeah. And knowing I had 2 children. My older son was born with significant disabilities. He had severe hydrocephalus when he was born, and he lived to be chronologically 23 years old. And he defied so much, and his death was actually unexpected. He had a shunt failure that ended up in another shunt failure while he was hospitalized, and it caused a brain hemorrhage. But in living his life, and I think part of it is, again, it's my clinical background, growing up in a family where conversations about death and dying were not taboo. My parents were always absolutely so clear about their values, what they wanted, what they didn't want. And they had truly grace-filled deaths. I was able to support them, both of them, through that. And they died exactly how they wanted to, from their death to their body disposition, everything. And how much easier it was, how much calmer it was, how honorable it was to be able to just have that knowledge and to show up really as an offering.
Yeah.
And so with my son, living with him was about navigating so many of the contradictions in our lives, right? A society that wants to take care of everyone and save every life and provide rights for every human being, all of which is indisputably important and necessary. And yet we actually don't fulfill that commitment very well. There's so many contradictions through how we fund organizations, how we value positions for the type of work that they're doing, providing adequate funding for housing with dignity. And then also thinking in my son's life, what infrastructures are in place to care for him if something happens to me? And
Right.
so there was a way that he and I could navigate conversations. He couldn't think in the abstract. He was very concrete in his thinking. But when, I was faced with the end of his life, I remember two things distinctly. And one was sitting in the hospital. He was in the neuro ICU unit. And I think it was after his second surgery, because after that shunt failure in the hospital, it caused additional brain damage. And his brain was affected from being born with hydrocephalus. So everything from his vision to cerebral palsy to speech to everything was affected by him. He was functional, but everything was affected. And so I remember just sitting on the bed and getting back to that global perspective of thinking about parents, but as a mother, thinking about these mothers around the world who've made such selfless decisions about how to protect their children in the midst of the most unimaginable circumstances. And thinking about Gabriel's life, this extraordinary life that he lived to his fullest potential, and also in keeping him alive, I would be keeping him alive for my sake and not his.
Yeah.
And I was so clear about that. And there was this moment when things shifted, and it helped that I had a clinical background and the team was just amazing at St. Vincent's, where I knew now we weren't intervening to reverse what had happened and brought him to the hospital, but we were now starting to chase other things that were going to start happening. And I just knew in that moment, it's time to take him home because he's going to leave this life with the same grace and dignity and integrity in which he lived it. And they didn't think he would make it home. And I'm like, nope, we're going to take him home in our pop-top Euro van with his golden retriever. And, we brought him home and he lived almost another week surrounded by community and home with his dog on his bed. And it was such a bittersweet, horrific. I will always grieve him at the loss of him. Yeah. And the weight of making that decision, it will always be the hardest decision of my life. At the same time, that balance between the living well and ending well, right? It just arrived at this place of grace. And I remember the hospital staff said to me, you showed us the difference between selfish love and selfless love. And it was right before Christmas. And the whole team from the hospital sent me this box. Like, this is the clinical team. And the charge nurse said, "You'll understand why this is the box of love." It's an extraordinary story. And I opened it up, and there were about 50 handmade ornaments. And all the staff in the hospital, the housekeepers, everyone, they wrote messages on these ornaments.
Wow.
Amazing, amazing. And for the first few years, I called it, the Tree of Angels that year. Because I'm like, how do you decorate a tree when someone you deeply love has just died right before Christmas?
Yeah.
There were lights, but what do you do? And all of a sudden, this box of love arrived. And every one of those got hung on the tree. Amazing story, right? And so here I tell you this with such sorrow, I can feel the weight in my heart. And yet I'm smiling.
Yeah.
Because we have this ability. I think there is this invitation to be with what is inevitable. And one of the most profound experiences we will all share. It will be different, the details,
Yeah.
the how, the when, the why, but we will all leave this physical life. And so is there a way that we as community can come together to do it better for all of us? All of us. So it's a calling, it's just like I could not do it. And I have these two amazing co-founders. We were strangers. One reached out to me and called me and said, "I found you on the internet." This is for the collective launched or any of that. And she was amazing in her late 20s and said all of my graduate work, she had her MFA, was doing legacy work and storytelling through fine arts and textiles. I said, "Well, I'm about to have this conversation with this other person that I was told to contact. Let me get back to you." So I met with this other person. We just, again, that was Abigail McNeil. And we just connected and we knew that we had to continue the conversation.
Yeah.
So then the three of us came together. This is about 2.5 years ago in my living room, rainy day, cup of tea. So Carolina Starrett, who goes between Portland and Neatarts, and Abigail, who lives in Arch Cape, and myself. And it was a calling, and we came together and we looked, and finally I said, "What are we going to do?" And it was just like, we can't not do this.
Yeah.
And so that was the beginning of the North Coast EOL Collective. And it was about a year or so and just deep soul work. Like, how do we do this? And so our story's on the website. But so here we are.
Wow. How cool is that?
Yeah, so my undergraduate degree is actually in sociology, and I was very interested in family systems cross-culturally. And then when I got married, I landed here on the North Coast, so that was the late 80s. And I was sort of figuring out what to do. And I was always passionate about public health. I knew I would do my graduate work in public health, but then I learned that there was a nursing program here in the community and that they had scholarships available. And there were 2 science scholarships that were full rides through the nursing program.
Ooh.
And so I applied for one of them and fortunately received it. And so that's how I ended up in the nursing program here. And I graduated in 93. And as soon as I started the nursing program, it just seemed so intuitive. And I was exactly where I was supposed to be, knowing that my trajectory would be in the public health field. And then I went to graduate school at OHSU at a time when very few nurses had their master's in public health. It was mostly physicians. They were epidemiologists, biostatisticians. I have a couple epidemiologists in my family over in the UK. And so, I went to school primarily with physicians, even though it was a granted 5-year cohort project with OHSU School of Nursing. So I graduated in 2002 from OHSU, and then I've done a little bit of postgraduate studies at Johns Hopkins.
When you were starting in that field then with mostly physicians, how did you see things change once there were nurses in the realm?
Yeah, it was, public health has always been very much kind of a niche field for a long time. I would say until probably about 15 years ago, maybe it seems like. And so going to school with physicians, it was just a different mindset of the way that they think. And I've always been very interested in infectious disease and epidemiology, but my focus actually was public health, community health nursing. And I think where it changed with more people, not only in undergraduate, getting a degree in public health, but their master's in public health is when it was becoming a requirement for positions, particularly at the state and federal level, or even in executive leadership at the local level. And so I think that that was part of it within the nursing profession. And now so many people are either studying public health as an undergraduate pursuit or, at a graduate level.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What did you enjoy most about it?
My practice or studying?
Oh, the practice, I think.
Yeah, so I am just a hopeless romantic when it comes to public health. The history of public health is fascinating, and I will say it saddens me that many people who do practice in public health and study public health actually don't know a lot about the history of public health. And public health was our original healthcare system before we entered into this world of a privatized for-profit healthcare system. And so that was part of it, is it just absolutely fascinated me how that population health perspective, how it wasn't just about providing care for the individual, but to see the community as the patient and how we start to address things more at a systemic level, right? And it always started with sanitation, right? Water, sanitation, infectious disease before we could treat so many communicable infectious diseases. So I think for me that's really the foundation of my interest in public health. And then looking at how it was practiced in so many other parts of the world, particularly, one country comes to mind, the UK and the National Health Service. And while it has so many challenges at this point in time, nurses are so deeply embedded in community there. And so they're not just isolated in one particular form of practice. And it's kind of how our public health nurses used to be in Clatsop County. There was a point in time up until really into the 90s where our public health nurses were the jail nurse, they were the school nurse, they were the clinic nurse, they were the maternal child health home visiting nurse. And so they were deeply embedded in community and the generations that existed within communities. So it was very, very relational. The foundation of trust was there. And these nurses really knew their community, and those in the community, those in the schools, really trusted their nurses. And so there's this high level of expertise and knowledge. And it was also very difficult to get a job in public health as a public health nurse back then. There just weren't very many openings. It was a very coveted position, and it was a revered position, and it also required more education than what was required to become a hospital nurse. And so,
was it more education because you had to know more things?
You had to
it
know
was a broader
more
scope.
Yeah, because it's much more, there's much more systems thinking involved in practicing public health. And, one example I have is a colleague of mine who had spent, and this is a very recent example, had spent much of her career really in the private sector, caring for patients, very task-oriented care, important, but task-oriented care, and made her way into public health. And because she had such a curious mind, she really saw how the practice of public health is really about the community. It's about the big picture. And while you may be treating some things in isolation, kind of the root cause of what you're treating is beyond just that individual. And so she spent a number of years in public health and actually became quite a voice with some of the state public health programs and really started understanding how the pieces are connected. And then has since returned back to the private sector, but more at a programmatic level. And because of the time that she has spent in public health, her ability to enhance the work that she's doing within the private healthcare system programmatically is really quite profound. And she is such an asset to that organization because she can see how things work internally, but she has this broader understanding of how it's all connected at the community level. And so for me, it's such a benefit to the community, but it's also just a way for me to celebrate the importance and the foundation of public health in all of our lives.
I just finished reading a book that was about a girl who at 18 became a teacher in Appalachia and in the 1800s, and all of the health issues that were there, but because of their culturally ingrown things about life, beliefs about life, and a lot of wives' tales and whatever, trying to get them to have clean water or get them to, just all of these diseases that went through, and just trying to understand the culture first. But when you're talking about trust, yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, I think for me, bringing it to present time, because I've had the opportunity to be in many, many different cultures as well as practice and then be a part of some projects in different cultures as well. So I have that I always say the global perspective, right? Which I think has always helped me stay grounded and have perspective on the issues that we need to address within our own home and community. And then, but when you were talking about, trust, I think that's one of the important lessons learned that came out of the pandemic. And, at a personal and professional level, what helped me have perspective about the situation was understanding public health and community health, not only at a local level, but at a global level, right? And remembering that there are so many communities around the world that were functioning at that level of crisis every single day simply because they don't have clean water.
Right.
They don't have proper sanitation. They don't have healthy food sources. And so that for me was just so grounding in keeping everything in perspective. But just to get back to your previous question, I have a long connection with Hawaii personally and professionally, and I've also done work there. And that is interesting because they have a state public health system, and then they have each of their islands kind of has their own local operation. But in Hawaii, the public health nurses are still the community health nurses. They're embedded in the community. They're the school nurses. They're doing work with the elderly. They're doing the emergency preparedness, the communicable disease, the maternal child health. And so when you go there, I worked there in a number of capacities. And when I was traveling back and forth for a consultation project I was on for about a year and a half recently, people would ask when I pick up my rental car, what do you do? And I say, oh, I'm here to do public health work and with the public health nursing branch. And immediately, whoever it was, the rental car agent, wherever, thank you so much for your service. There's that recognition of the importance of public health nurses to their community.
Yeah.
You don't see that here anymore. We used to, but we don't see that here anymore. Most people don't really understand what public health does anymore. And, I was hoping during the pandemic, we tried to kind of connect the history of public health in Clatsop County to its impact in our present day response.
And so tell us a little bit more, what is the role of public health here?
Well, the role of public health, in basically one sentence, is to minimize the risk of morbidity and mortality, right? So we're all going to die. That's a given. And inevitably, we'll develop some type of disability in our lifetime, even if it's just simply related to the aging process. But what are the risk factors that contribute to that? And what can we either mitigate or eliminate to prevent premature morbidity, premature death, or morbidity or mortality, right? So it's morbidity is the disability, mortality is the death and dying. And so So we look at that, and that's why we use epidemiology, which is really statistics, is we look at things in the bigger picture and explore what are the causative factors that are contributing to a particular outbreak, right? A particular living condition. And it could be lead, right? It could be secondhand smoke or tobacco smoke, or it could be air quality or water quality. And as we know, there are times when we have boil water notices. And why? Because the water is not safe to drink and it will cause sickness and illness in people, right? So we're constantly testing our water. And there's so many examples of this. And I always, say that public health, a lot of people don't understand what public health does anymore. And in some ways, that's a good thing. It means we're doing a good job because we are the gatekeeper of the community's health. And behind the scenes, 24 hours, 7 days a week, there are people on call, or we're responding to making sure that the food that you eat in restaurants is safe, right? That the water, our public works departments are making sure that the water we drink is safe, that our sewage and sanitation programs are working, that our drinking wells are safe in unincorporated areas that have private drinking water systems, right? And that we have clinics to treat communicable diseases and to also identify who may have been a contact to a communicable disease so they can be treated promptly. Right. There's so many ways we do this. And also we have like women, infant, and children nutrition program, right? So we can have healthy pregnancies and healthy newborns. And we have our maternal child health programs as well to support those moms who need that support through a healthy pregnancy, or if they've had a complicated pregnancy or issues with a newborn, a nurse can go to their home and spend time with them to make sure that they have a healthy and appropriate development.
So you are pairing partners with legislators and partners with hospitals and local other medical.
Yeah, and the best of all worlds, public health is a public agency, right? It has certainly challenges with funding. There's lots of money when it's a crisis, but when we just need to sustain an infrastructure, it doesn't, unfortunately, is not as high as it used to be in the priority list. And then there's just organizational changes that happen. Public health, like so many other, public agencies, are as good or strong as our elected officials who understand and appreciate public health, and as much as the community values it, right? So it really has evolved and changed. And in many ways, for myself, there's times when it feels unrecognizable anymore. It still has its important statutory responsibilities, but most public health agencies do so much more than what's just statutorily required.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they can't do it alone. They have to do it with all of their other, community-based organizations.
Yeah.
So, but I've been retired from public health now for a while.
Yeah. Also, then the people who are working in those fields are compassionate people, and they're helpers, they're fixers, that helps.
Yeah, I think it's different, it depends if you're in environmental health or, what specialty is, of interest, what brings someone into public health. Most people who do go into public health, they might be interested in policy. So they're going to want to be in Salem working on policy and legislation. Others are, like your nurses, are wanting to do that hands-on care. But there is that sense of care and concern and responsibility to the community. And I've always said, and it was my mantra through the pandemic, I started the pandemic. I was executive director of a program in Hawaii at that time there. And then I was asked if I would come back to my former position here. And I would always say the health and well-being of the community is a shared responsibility. Mm-hmm. And I think we all may say that in different ways, but for individuals who just feel that call into public health, they want their communities to be better. And there's so many ways of doing it. And public health is just one piece of it, one part of it.
Right. Mm-hmm. So you're retired and have done some other things like maybe paddling and other activities?
Yeah, that concept of retirement's a funny one because it doesn't really resonate with me. And I've never really thought about my life or my career in the context of I work and then I retire.
Yeah.
So I had to kind of formulate what is my response. And so I say I've retired from executive leadership. That's what I've done.
Yeah.
And so I've continued doing some consulting, public health consulting. Yes, I'm an avid hiker. I hike all over the place. And speaking of end of life, I just came back from Hawaii and I'm on the women's dragon boat team. We have a wonderful one in Astoria now, but there's been one down in the Nehalem Bay for, I think, probably about 13, 14 years now. And I've been with them since 2018.
And of course, you listened to that episode.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yes. And so anyway, a handful of us from our team in Nehalem were invited to join an outrigger team in Hawaii for their annual Paddle for Life event for the Pacific Cancer Foundation.
Cool.
But it was the first time in 5 years that they'd done the paddle from Maui to Lanai, stayed overnight and paddled back. And so we were part of that, got back a little over a week ago, and just amazing. Overall, I think the event raised close to $300,000.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
And people don't realize Hawaii, tertiary care is on Oahu. People have to fly between islands to get a lot of care and supports. It's much more logistically challenging there. And, there are many people who live in Hawaii who don't have the resources as well. So, yeah. So
just feeds your soul, doesn't it?
Yeah.
All these things to help to be a part of the bigger community and make things happen.
Yeah, we're all connected, right?
All connected.
We're all connected, but the North Coast is my home. Cannon Beach has been my home for a long time. And just really grateful to still be a part of this community. It's amazing.
Thank you so much. I want to put the links in the show notes.
Okay.
Well, listeners, I don't know about you, but I found that concept of a death cafe totally intriguing and fascinating. As she says, death is a part of life, and everyone is going to experience it at one time or another, or we're going to have loved ones that we are standing beside as well. So I would encourage you to check out her website. It is a beautiful website, lots of information there, and contact Margo if you have questions or any comments or things that you'd want to discuss with her. She is a lovely person, and I felt so comfortable with her. I would feel so comfortable discussing my thoughts and cares as well. So thank you, Margo, for being a part of our Women of the Northwest. You are truly extraordinary, and I applaud your efforts. Okay, listeners, here's another wrap up. So be sure and check out those show notes, and we will see you next time. That's all for today. Did you know it's easy to share an episode with your friends? When the podcast is open, look for 3 dots. Click on them, and you'll see various options. You can download the episode, play it next or last, go to the show, save the episode, or copy the link. Isn't technology amazing? Hey, I'm looking forward to you joining me next time. I hope you have a great week.